Hi, my name is Andrew, and this is my Feeling Happiness presentation speech thing. In the midst of a raging pandemic that we call coronavirus, my sister, my cousin, and I all raced down a gigantic steep hill. When all of a sudden, boom, my cousin face plants right into steaming cement. Although this might not sound like happiness, it was the times before and after this that really hit the mark. Before this, I hadn't really gone on a bike ride in my entire life, but we were trying to overcome the feeling of boredom looming over our group. We decided to go through many neighborhoods throughout our area. It was very enjoyable, as we would spend the entire day going on these adventures, exploring these uncharted lands that we used to call home. We would bring lunches, tons of water, a couple like snack type things on these ventures to make sure that we had nothing to worry about and we didn't have to go back for anything. On the other hand, this experience had me laughing my head off. What made me laugh so much was when we took off on one of these periodic adventures and we saw a dog sprint out of a house. We were so surprised and shocked that we stood still for a moment. It was like time had stopped. But then I suddenly came to the realization that this was somebody's dog, and they probably wanted it back. So my cousin and I went up to the house, and my two sisters stayed around their driveway, waited for us to come back down, and informed them that their dog had run away, or had gotten out. But to my surprise, a very little kid answered the door. He was probably like 3 or 4, and invited us in. But this was coronavirus times, so we sadly declined the offer. And apparently the dog did this a lot, and they knew the person that the dog ran out to, so they casually just brushed it off to my surprise. Another cool thing that happened during our trips was when we saw these roaring hills, and right next to it was a lady's house, and in the front yard there was probably 40 statues, and so it was weird. In the front yard alone, and we didn't even see the backyard, so there were probably 100. We saw rivers, lakes, boulders, and just a lot of people having fun on their streets, whether they were playing basketball in cul-de-sacs, walking their dog, going on a casual run, and it made us feel happy inside that people were having fun as we were. We also were able to find an under construction neighborhood that being built into another one that we would usually go to. And this was cool because we got to see houses being built over time and like the stages that the houses were going through. And it had some pretty cool woods and lakes around the neighborhood. We also saw cool animals that we just saw in the wild, like turkeys, vultures, and even foxes out when we were riding our bikes. I learned that it doesn't take a state park or a national park to give you some cool sights and good places to go to see cool things. Now this part is where I got scared and nervous for my cousin's well-being. My cousin and I went on another trip to a very rolling neighborhood with a very steep hill. I was in front of my cousin cruising down the very steep hill, making sure not to hit a big pothole, which I didn't, because there were many. But when I yelled out, "Watch out for the big pothole ahead to my right," or something like that, my cousin simply replied, "Okay," and shrugged it off. And we moved on until kabloom! Right as he said "okay," he hit the pothole and scraped up the whole right side of his body. It was pretty gruesome and terrifying. As we had forgotten to, it was pretty gruesome and terrifying. But what made it even scarier was we forgot to bring a phone. So, and we had no way to get back home because he couldn't ride his bike, because he had like scrapes all up his knees, and it was kind of disgusting. There was asphalt all inside his knees, and it looked like he had a red knee, like just all red. There was asphalt. Luckily, he screamed out my name, or I would have never noticed he was even there. On the plus side, I went around knocking on doors until one lady answered, but it took like 4 houses to get to her. and she just said, "How may I help you?" In disbelief that somebody had finally answered the door. Somebody had finally answered the door. I said, my cousin fell on his bike and hurt and scraped up his knee. And would you mind sparing some band-aids and cloths that you wouldn't mind getting dirty? She replied, "Sure, but can you bring him up here?" And she actually just helped him pour some water on pour like a Dasani on his leg and just like pat it up and put some band-aids on it and stuff. So I raced down to where my cousin was and tried to get him up as fast as I could and as well as I could. And in short, basically, we cleaned him up, and I got the lady's phone to call my dad to come pick us up and our bikes. And he was pretty frustrated because he was in the middle of doing yard work, but yeah. I took a lot from this experience that I shared with my family. I think that I should try new things more often and take more chances before I become too old to do these things with my family. I'm glad that we took chances to try to try something new as well as doing it as long as I have a bike and some people to go with. Ultimately, I learned that I can find happiness in anything I do, and hopefully that everyone else can find that too.